Okay, I am with Marin Zhelezov, and you're coming to us from Bulgaria, is that right? Or
Correct.
all right, cool. I'm learning about this guy really fast. He's cool. He did a TED talk, and he is a medical doctor, neuroscientist, and he specializes in trying to help us figure out how to optimize the brain from a scientific and evolutionary perspective. Uh, and so we want to talk about that today, as well as the scientific perspective of the third eye or the pineal gland. Um,
Mhm.
so, yeah, so before we get into all of that interesting stuff, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into all this.
Well, I first I was interested in the human body since I was a child.
Hmm.
It was just some random accident. I found a book about the human body. It was a popular science book written for children. I still have it here,
Wow.
and that I found it fascinating. It works like Emil Conrad's imprinting. If you
Hmm.
heard the story about his, I think it was ducks.
Hmm.
The first thing which you see becomes your mother if you're a duck.
Oh, yeah, yeah, like ducks when they if the first thing that they see, they think it's their mom, even if it's
Yeah,
not their
he,
mom.
he had a lot of ducks following him around in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
lab. Something similar happened with me. One of the first fascinating things
Hmm.
scientific which I read was about the human body. So
Interesting.
yeah, it's so a logical thing to do was to become a medical doctor. I did that. Uh, and then, however, my scientific interest trumped my clinical interest,
Mm,
so I immediately went into research instead of continuing treating patients
okay.
directly. So, long story short, yeah, I have
Mm.
a PhD. I almost finished my PhD in neuroscience. I have
Oh
a
yeah, you're
special.
finishing it this year, right?
Hopefully, within 2 months, I've been saying
Okay.
this for several years
Yeah,
now, but this time.
that's how it goes sometimes. Yeah.
I have a specialty in human anatomy and cell biology.
Hmm.
That doesn't matter. I want to tell you that I have a lot of formal education, but nevertheless, that didn't interfere too much with my real education.
Okay, that's a good distinction to make. Um. So, and is let me just ask, like, your how did you decide you wanted to specialize in how? It seems like you're mostly specialized in the brain and from an evolutionary perspective, and how did that become your one of your main interests?
You're asking me a question which I asked myself for quite some time when I tried to trace back how I got to the point where I am currently at.
Yeah.
I remember how I got interested into neuroscience. I was in the ninth grade, I think,
Okay.
and I bought another popular science book written for children, which was Boiling Brains, something like that.
Okay.
And I was blown away when I
Yeah.
read about the brain there. I said, yeah, this is it. And I consumed everything I could get my hands on about
Mm-hmm.
the brain. Regarding evolution,
Mm-hmm.
uh, I think my evolutionary interest actually started with I was much younger, so many years ago. Don't remember, maybe 10 years ago. I
Mm-hmm.
read a book about how to pick up girls,
Okay.
which actually worked.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Good for you.
Yeah, and there were a lot of evolutionary insights there.
Interesting.
Actually, it was one of the good works on the subject with a lot of scientific references.
Mm.
But I think that my real evolutionary interest came after I read Desmond Morris, The
Okay.
Naked Ape, a classical book.
Mm.
It was banned, burned, and it blew me away.
Wow. All right. So that's a good start. And then well, before we get into a lot more details, you're the first official guest that I've had that has been on any kind of a official TED talk. So
Mhm.
uh that's something that I was watching recently, and I'm wondering what was that experience like? I know it's a TEDx in Europe, but what was the experience like to go through actually giving a TED talk?
Uh, all right. I usually like pretty much
Yeah,
speaking
yeah,
public.
yeah,
This is why I also went into academia to have the opportunity to teach.
yeah.
I Many people were very stressed that they should speak in public and that is recorded. I don't care about that. I
Mm-hmm,
enjoyed the process.
mm-hmm,
It was a bit formal because you have to present almost final polished version of your talk weeks before that, and I
mm,
like to improvise,
yeah,
but I understand the concerns of the organizers.
mm-hmm,
What was funny was that I was just changing my apartment at the time,
yeah.
and at my new apartment, I had really noisy neighbors, and the walls were very thin.
Oh,
So
okay.
for yeah, for 10 days straight, I couldn't sleep, and I was in a
Huh,
very nasty, altered state of consciousness.
okay.
It was a bit surreal, the whole event.
Oh, so going up to the TED Talk, you were kind of like in an altered state of mind from not enough sleep.
I didn't have time to practice to memorize what I was written in advance. So it was just everything came in the last minute, but it turned
Mm,
out surprisingly
yeah,
well, I think.
turned out good. Um, so you said that you're mainly you mostly research how to optimize the brain. Um, a lot of things come to mind when we hear things like that. But what does that mean to you specifically in your research, how to optimize the brain?
I also come from a bit of a naturalistic perspective. I
Mm,
don't think that we can achieve superpowers without trade-offs. If
yeah.
we imagine the physiology as a perfectly balanced
Mm-hmm,
scale,
mm-hmm,
if you tip the scale into one direction, let's say that you increase this function, that would
mm-hmm,
always be at the expense of something else, either in the short term or in the long term.
mm-hmm,
So I am always looking for a net positive effect on my performance.
mm-hmm.
For example, I wouldn't abuse some some of the harder nootropics
Yeah.
because I know that they will take their toll down the road. So
Yeah.
you may be able to memorize a lot for a short amount of time, but then you have to sleep for 15 hours to consolidate it.
Right.
Yeah. So my this is my mostly my informal research. My
Mm-hmm,
formal research is a bit more theoretically interesting than that,
mm-hmm,
but I'm trying to formalize this line of research as well.
mm-hmm,
So anything regarding efficient how to learn. Uh, I don't know whether you've heard of the super memo software, which is I think one of the greatest inventions of humanity, and I'm not saying this lightly.
uh-huh.
How to optimize the brain via nutritional support, supplements, lifestyle.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, let's call it evidence-based
Yeah.
productivity, increase of productivity.
Right. Okay. And then well, just what comes to mind speaking in that terms is sometimes even just for the fun of it, I think of like science fiction ideas, and I'm sure you're familiar with things like, we're a level, barely a level 0 civilization, and we can strive to be a level, 1, 2, or 3, and however many hundreds or thousands of years. But so that's all thinking from a uh, you know, mechanical and computer perspective. But I was just kind of thinking about this when I was thinking about those words last night, is optimizing the brain. I think, and it may have to do with the interplay between traditional intelligence, human intelligence, and that of computer AI intelligence. Um, but I think more of the achieving higher levels of civilization is going to be about um, new levels of human consciousness. Um, So I don't know. Have you ever thought about that and what that future might look like as far as optimizing the brain, whether that it is with just itself or paired with AI or whatever else?
Well, of course,
Mm,
uh, well, Neuralink gives one perspective.
right.
Whether that would be a net positive in the long term,
Hmm.
uh, we'll wait and we will see.
Yeah.
So that's one possibility, but I think that we haven't reached the full ordinary potential, our full ordinary potential right
Hmm.
now. A great amount of human productivity, and by productivity, I mean creative productivity, because there are different types of knowledge workers, and the greatest assets are the people who can derive new ideas.
Right.
So the genius type of thinkers.
Hmm.
And one idea can, there are specific circumstances which increase the chance of you getting a good idea.
Hmm.
And this isn't something which can be modeled or streamlined, or this isn't something that you can do while you're working 9 to 5 job.
Hmm.
So the way currently most of our work is being organized, I think that it is suboptimally efficient to
Yeah.
support the genius type of people who are good at
Hmm.
creating ideas.
Right. Right.
Also, we are very bad at, our memory is very poor for facts, and
Hmm.
the greatest remedy currently is the super memo software. I'm not endorsing them in any official way, but I think that it is something which that is widely unheard of,
Yeah.
something which has many, I think almost 30 years. So the software is available for many decades now, and it is written by a genius who lives almost like a hermit with few interactions with the outside environment. So
Hmm.
the software isn't very user friendly, but
Hmm.
currently it is the best thing which we have that can model how the formation of human memory works.
Yeah. Can you tell
And
us a little bit more about it specifically? Because I think most people,
yeah, I
including
was,
myself, were new to the concept of that software.
yeah, it's no, you aren't new. Maybe you've heard of software such as Anki.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a flashcard type of software.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, it's something like that. But the Super Memo was the first original software,
Mm.
and it's highly complicated. Super Memo is like a spaceship, and Anki is uh, like a donkey, for example. You know, both will get you from A to B, but the difference
Yeah.
in functionality is quite high. The problem is that the learning curve is enormously steep, and
Hmm.
it takes a great time investment to learn how to use that.
Mm.
But statistically, it can show you how it can really everything which you put in it. The software guarantees that you memorize above 95% of it.
Hmm.
So the retention is high. This isn't the greatest thing about it. The greatest thing about it is, which really got me hooked into using it,
Hmm.
is that the latest editions now have hacked the creativity algorithm of the brain. So
Really? Okay. That's
written
interesting.
by a really deep genius, and which I
Hmm.
highly respect. And I think that this needs more publicity and marketing.
Yeah.
And imagine you have a software
Hmm.
that has studied how the brain creates new ideas, and it can feed you information
Mm.
in a specific pattern to increase the chance of you having a genius idea.
Yeah. I mean that. Like, I forget the exact quote by Jean Piaget,
Uh,
but he said that the problem with education is it's basically making people learn the same things over and over again, where rather what we need to have in our education system is to help people learn how to uh, learn and create new things and new ideas rather than just the same stuff over and over again. In other words, uh, nurture, foster, and harness and creativity. uh, I know a lot of the corporations now are trying to foster that in their corporate environments, like at Google and corporations like that.
Mm.
But it's probably just the tip of the iceberg compared to, um, what we're able to do as far as really harnessing creativity. Uh, and then not only and that's just sort of getting into the individual level, which that's another interesting thing too, is one on the individual level, like how maybe you or I or anyone could become more creative as individuals, but then the sort of next level is putting that into networks of creative people. So together the network of creative people are coming up with bigger and bigger ideas, and not just like one idea per person. um is that something that you see through happening through software or education, or uh what's the best ways that you see that evolving over time?
Which, the network of creative people, or the first part which you addressed, the change in education?
Well, I'm thinking both. Like how do we foster that on the individual level and then on the
Yeah.
collective level?
I can share just
Mm,
some random thoughts,
sure.
because I don't think I am knowledgeable enough to propose an education change in the educational system. That's
Well, not
too
necessarily the system, but I mean maybe even just like using a different type of software or a different study habits even on the individual level.
I can tell you that since I have a lot of experience in
Hmm.
teaching in academia,
Yeah.
I have some, let's say, experience.
Hmm.
I can tell you that the majority of people, of students, do just fine with the current way the education system works. Like, the majority of students are either incapable or unwilling to create anything. But
Yeah.
many of them are hard workers,
Yeah.
and many of them will benefit from more structured structured process of education, where
Hmm.
they can memorize facts, and afterwards most of them don't want to think, solve problems, and create a lot. They just want to apply that knowledge, and that makes them efficient. So I think this isn't something that we should throw away easily.
Yeah.
However, I think that the current system does not serve properly the small subset of people who are highly intelligent, highly creative, and the most creative ones are also very messy. So there are whole books written, for example, on Einstein's desk. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
creative people are messy. That messiness allows them to be creative, and
Yeah.
such people do poorly actually in higher education. So
Right. Yeah. Just like Einstein.
smartest one, the genius ones, just fail because
Right.
they cannot keep up with all the brute memorization process.
Right.
So we need like we need a way to recognize them and nudge them in a
Yeah.
direction.
It's interesting you mentioned Einstein, and when we were discussing to do this recording,
Mm.
I mentioned the Einstein brain because that's a very interesting phenomena to me, and it's funny because a lot of people don't know about the lost and recovered Einstein brain. Uh,
Mm.
but so what's interesting is when they finally put out the findings on the physical Einstein brain just a few years ago, because it was lost for several decades.
It was stolen, I think.
Yeah,
It
it
was
was.
not a collection.
Yeah, it was stolen, and it was kind of a big deal because Einstein and his family did not uh, authorize any like scientific research on his body, but someone in the lab or the hospital that he or the morgue or whatever basically said did their own thing, decided to steal the brain and disappeared with it for like 40 or 50 years, and then it just resurfaced recently, and they somehow were able to validate everything. But what's interesting on the level of what you study is it had about 17% more neurons than the normal brain, and it had some additional folds on the inside, which I'm
Mm.
sure is something you know more about. But what comes to mind is, especially in light of what we're just talking about, and when I was reading that story a while back, is how much of that is genetic handed down, like natural, like Einstein was just a guy with a huge brain, or how much of it is because of the I don't know if you'd call it mental environment that he put himself through, but basically there's probably it's probably some of each,
Mm.
nature and nurture, just like most things. uh but basically some he probably was a little smarter than normal, especially on the creative level.
A
uh
little.
yeah, but I think what may, because there's a lot of people that are maybe in that category, but the difference is he took that to another level by um focusing it on certain things that he wanted to learn and prove, and theories that he wanted to formulate and all that. But I guess what I'm getting at is the idea, if because he put himself through such a rigorous psychological learning and theory environment and idea environment, if that is what potentially caused the additional folds and neurons, or what do you think? I'm is what I'm like most interested about, the neuroscientist perspective on the Einstein brain.
Okay, so for a surprise, I stole Einstein's brain,
It
so I
was
can.
you.
Yes,
There it is. There. It's
Einstein's brain.
all right. Finally, we caught the guy.
Yeah, I've read into the story and I can
Yeah.
comment in great detail. I will try to.
Good, because I've been interested in this, and there's not actually a lot of literature on it, just like a little bit of the story. But yeah,
Yeah.
tell us.
Uh, so first thing to keep in mind is that the persona of Einstein is now a mythological figure.
Yeah, yeah.
So this is something we should first keep in mind, and all kinds of stories like that will pop up.
Mhm.
I've read into the actual research, and I will tell you what people found.
Sure.
It isn't that his brain wasn't larger.
Okay.
Uh,
It just had more
the,
neurons and folds, right?
it actually had less faults. So this fault, for example,
Mm-hmm.
this fault, which we call the Sylvian fissure.
Mm-hmm.
So part of it was missing. So especially this part here. So this part was missing, and when this part was missing, that allowed for the regions adjacent to it, which are part of the so-called association cortex, where higher order processing occurs, to communicate closely together. So that may have given him an advantage. At least
So
this is the
he
hypothesis.
somehow he had a shortcut that
A
was
shortcut, correct? Yes, a
interesting,
shortcut.
huh?
And he had a greater volume of brain matter in just the specific areas of his brain, which are known to be associated with mathematical thinking and mathematical ability.
Okay.
So only these areas of his brain were enlarged. And this is normal, but I will tell you what enlarged means. Enlarged compared to what? So this is the key. Uh, Before I comment on that, because it's important, let us first discuss what enlarged means in general. If
Okay.
you're someone who plays the violin,
Mm-hmm. Like
the
Einstein was.
yes, of course. If you have practiced a specific single skill, the part of the brain which is responsible for the
For that
process,
skill.
yeah, it will enlarge.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Like an example that comes to mind, I might be wrong, but I think it's the hypothalamus is associated with spatial recognition. So people like taxi drivers in London, for example, have large,
Hippocampus,
yeah, yeah, they have larger hippocampus. Is that
of
right?
course. Yes.
So same thing with someone like Einstein, who spent a lot of time doing mathematical theorizing. It would be kind of obvious that that area would be larger. But go ahead.
Yeah, it is larger. What do we mean by larger? It doesn't necessarily mean that you have more brain cells. It's difficult to get new brain cells. Some areas of the brain, such as the hippocampus,
Mm,
can create new neurons. Uh, Larger mean, however, what we can increase in the adult brain is the amount of connections. So that
right.
can happen. And each neuron has on average 10,000 connections, and in some neurons can have more than a million. So in
Mm,
the cerebellum, for example. So
right.
when the amount of connections, synapses increases,
Mm-hmm.
that part of the brain will expand,
Mm-hmm.
because also all right, also blood vessels will increase. If that
Mm,
area of the brain works harder, you need more oxygen, so more blood vessels will be there. That will further expand the brain. And also some supportive elements such as the glial cells, which are highly important for supporting the neuronal function. They can increase in number, and that again will lead to increase in brain volume. So it doesn't necessarily mean more neurons, but it doesn't matter. All of these other things, if they increase in volume, that will greatly increase the efficiency of
right.
that brain area. But let's discuss what enlarged in Einstein means, enlarged compared to what, because we don't have some average. It isn't useful because the size of the brain from person to person varies greatly.
Yeah.
So we don't have some like super objective standard. The
Right.
Einstein's brain was compared to a group of control brains.
A what brain? I'm sorry.
Control,
Okay.
control,
Okay.
like a reference, some random people's brains
Okay.
were taken and the volumes of these areas were measured and averaged, and then Einstein's brain was compared to those.
Okay.
However, the problem with the research is that the people to whom Einstein's brain was compared to
Mm-hmm.
were no mathematical geniuses. So
Yeah.
it's
Mm,
logical to assume that statistically those areas in his brain would be larger
yeah.
compared to them. It would be interesting if we got the brains of, let's say, 10 or 20 mathematical geniuses and
Is that
compared.
something you could research? Just like, is that something you could find the data on? Is what the brains like are of mathematical scientists or whatever?
We can find it. It would be even better if we can find the brains. We just need 20 mathematical geniuses who agree to donate their brains for research.
Okay, I didn't know. I don't know if that was like something that was on file for neuroscientists like yourself. But I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, dissecting brains is something which I do on almost a daily basis.
All right.
Like a dirty job, but someone's got to do it.
Yeah.
The next thing was that a lot of the brains to whom Einstein's brain was compared weren't at his age. Some were some years younger,
Mm,
for example. That's again, that's a form of error and bias which can
mm,
occur in the research. I don't want to in no way minimize his achievement or the
yeah.
whole mythology thing around him, but
Mm,
it's just some things to keep in mind when interpreting such
mm,
research.
mm,
Also, some bigger in terms of brain doesn't necessarily mean better,
yeah.
unlike other organs, where it's logical, the case logical there. But uh,
Mm,
so, for example, um, what you really are interested in is the efficiency of connections, and
yeah. Connectivity.
yes, not even the volume, because people with high intelligence have less connections in their brain. They're just
Mm.
more efficient.
Interesting stuff. Okay. So, but is there anything that we have that, or like you from your perspective, can tell us or surmise as far as um, what that means to us? As like, does that just mean almost like the taxi driver example that, if you study spatial recognition for a long time, that will become enlarged? Same thing with if you study, if you're a mathematics professor or a serious mathematic person, then that part becomes enlarged. Is that basically all that we really learned, or did we learn anything from studying Einstein's brain or anything unusual?
I can definitely tell you that if you scroll TikTok for several hours a day, the
Yeah.
TikTok area of the brain will enlarge for sure, at
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
expense of other areas.
Mm.
I can't tell you anything ultra groundbreaking and specific,
Mm-hmm.
which we couldn't have guessed from other brain studies when we analyzed
Right.
Einstein's brain. At least up to my knowledge, I've read some of the studies. I'm not an expert on that. If
Mm-hmm.
someone has more knowledge, I would be most happy if they contact me and share with me some resources. I'm interested in, yeah, going
Okay.
further.
Well, while we're on this subject, and maybe it's somehow related, since we're talking about these specific areas of the brain and creativity and efficiency and everything else. Another area we talked about maybe getting into a little bit today is the third eye from a scientific perspective, or the pineal gland, and it seems like that's something that you studied a bit. So what can you tell us about the science of our third eye?
I got some insight some years ago, which I found that it was pretty amusing and interesting. There is a lot of mythology around the third eye, but it seems that there is at least some scientific basis to why we call the pineal gland the third eye. So the pineal gland is a small gland located uh, like at the back of the brainstem.
Okay.
So right on top of the brainstem, right at the back.
Right on top of the lizard part, right?
A bit, yeah, a bit higher than that,
Yeah, yeah.
but just a bit higher than that.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like a pine, a
A
pine
pine
cone,
cone. Yeah, yeah.
like a pine cone. So hence the pineal gland. It's very firm because it accumulates a lot of calcium with age, which is a normal process. You know, in some sites you can read how to decalcify your pineal gland, whether there is something into it, I don't know.
Hmm.
But you can read stuff like that. Now, what's interesting about it
Mm-hmm.
in and in smaller animals like lizards, where the head is small and the skull is thin,
Mm-hmm.
light can pass through the skull because the skull is semi-transparent.
Okay.
And the pineal gland functions as a third eye, which detects whether it's currently day or night. So the
Interesting.
eyes will like look at object movement, but the pineal gland will only look at whether currently we have there is a day or a night.
Hmm.
And when the pineal gland detects that there is a day, that currently it's a day, it will change hormones and the autonomic nervous system to
Mm-hmm.
to address the specific challenges which the animal can have throughout the day.
Mm-hmm.
So if there is a day and you'll be more active, you'll be more your attention will increase, your
Mm-hmm.
memory will increase, whatever. And similarly, when the night comes and you have to go to sleep, the pineal gland will start secreting the hormone of sleep, melatonin, which will
Mm-hmm.
prepare you for sleep. You'll calm down, you know, you'll get sleepy. Your immune system will change its function.
Mm-hmm.
The body's cells will start activating processes of repair.
And from an evolutionary perspective, a lot of animals, including what, primates like us, you could
Mhm.
say during the day we're more of the hunters, but at night we're potentially prey. So our physiology is kind of based on that. If we need to be careful about being attacked compared to be uh, on the search for food and that kind of things, an evolutionary perspective.
I want to say just a few more things about the pineal gland,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
remind me in 5 minutes to tell you about a good insight which I had several days ago. Why our sleep gets messed up when there is a full moon. So
A full moon. Okay.
it perfectly makes sense. But
Okay.
so the pineal gland. So this is it actually sees the light, at least in some animals. But now in humans it sees no light because the skull is thick.
Mm-hmm.
No light can pass through it. However, it it has the same function, but now it receives information about whether there is about whether currently we have day or night
Mm-hmm.
from the eyes. So there are
Mm-hmm.
special cells in the retina
Mm-hmm.
which only detect blue light,
Hmm.
and they are very different from the photoreceptors, from the rods and cones. They are totally different cells. You do not consciously experience that blue light, but that
Interesting.
information is transferred via special fibers to the pineal gland.
Hmm.
And this is how the pineal gland receives information. What is blue? The sky. So when the sky is blue, when you see that bright blue color, immediately the pineal gland is notified that it is a day, suppress melatonin release, wake up, activate the body for
Hmm.
fight or flight. And this is why blue screens are so damaging.
Hmm.
If you check your social media, and this is why almost all social media sites are blue in color, because this
Hmm.
is the color which activates you the most, it keeps you awake the most. If you check your phone prior to bed, that can suppress melatonin release for hours.
Hmm.
So you may fall, either you won't be able to fall asleep easily, or you'll fall asleep, but you won't get enough melatonin, and the
Hmm.
sleep won't be restorative. And melatonin is highly important for like protecting you from cancer, increasing immune system function, whatever. So in fact, it really is a third eye, and embryologically, it originates from the same tissue which forms the retina of the eye. So it's anatomically, functionally, and embryologically the third eye.
It just works through different eyeball cells, basically, for like layman's terms.
Yes, and now we get into even more juicy and interesting stuff.
Okay.
The third eye is considered, it has some spiritual status when you read about that in a lot of writings.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, it has been shown that the pineal gland in humans can secrete DMT.
Yeah.
So that's very interesting. Although the levels are, the levels which are thought that are secreted are not enough to induce any psychedelic states, but nevertheless, the pineal gland
It's like
secretes DMT.
microdosing.
I don't know, but it's
Okay.
something interesting. Also, the lungs
Mm.
can secrete DMT. This is why probably some breathing techniques
Mm.
can directly activate the lungs,
Interesting.
secrete DMT and induce a state.
Yeah. And I guess that would be why that there's been even like oxygen bars where people kind of get high off an excess of oxygen. I don't know if that's
Uh,
related to
no
the
idea.
no idea. It's just some strange thing of the way the body works.
I can tell you how I think the mechanism works.
Okay.
When you consciously change the rhythm of your breathing, two things can occur. The first thing is that you will change the activation of specific parts of your brain, especially you calm down the prefrontal cortex.
Okay.
So you will suppress you will get into an altered state where the logical, the wake up mind will be a bit suppressed. The second thing which will happen is that the lungs will start secreting DMT. And the amount of DMT from the lungs plus the amount of DMT from the pineal gland
Mm-hmm.
can, in fact, induce a state when the prefrontal cortex is suppressed. So,
Mm.
like that small dose now would be sufficient if the prefrontal cortex is suppressed. So, the control of breathing has a double function. This is just a hypothesis. I'm not telling you that it's true. It is true. I have no experience with that. It's just an intellectual curiosity.
So it sounds like it creates chemically like a flow state.
Something like that.
Yeah. Because when the prefrontal cortex is overly active, like like your normal day-to-day life, then you're less in your unconscious mind. But when you're in a flow state, like on your top performance of performing whatever that you've practiced to perform, or as we did as hunters for thousands and thousands of years or whatever, um it's a connection of the body, mind, environment, and unconscious and conscious mind of that flow state. So it sounds like that would be kind of what would be going down when it would like kind of shut down the prefrontal cortex for the most part, but then everything else is kind of like at a flow.
Well, I don't think so, because
Mm,
the flow state is specifically
yeah.
defined as the state where you're at the edge of your competence
Yeah. Yeah.
skill and the difficulty. So it's something very difficult. I'm
Mm,
speaking more about
mm.
full-blown altered state, a psychedelic altered state,
Oh yeah.
meditation induced by meditation. So this is why the control of breathing is so important. So
Mm,
many things happen. You change the gases, you
mm,
change the acidity of your body, you change the rhythm. Also controls directly the brain, so it suppresses, not suppresses, modulates
mm,
prefrontal function. That rhythm of breathing can also secrete DMT from the lungs. Plus, that overall state can um, uh, be can allow the overall DMT levels from the lungs plus the pineal gland to now induce a state. I'm also very interested
mm,
whether the kidneys
mm.
can secrete or degrade DMT, and how kidney function changes with during those states. That's something which I'll be most interested to check out.
Now, another thing that comes to mind, especially when you're talking about how normally lizards, for example,
Mm,
connect to the outside world through their pineal gland, um, and because it's sensing light, is
mm,
I'm not a new age expert, but a lot of what it's about is uh, like connecting to the energy of the universe, you might say. And I think a lot of that is what is like the pineal gland theory and the new age sort of theory. However, woo woo or BS it may or may not be. I don't know. But I'm wondering what you think as far as any energy, whether it may or may not be light or something like that, whether that's another type of wave, uh, whether that's X-ray, gamma ray, microwave, whatever else, if it might be something that sort of connects to the waves that flow throughout all matter. Is that something that you think might connect through the pineal gland, or that is that just some woo-woo stuff that we don't have any science for?
well, I'm very open-minded, but I'm also very grounded in what can be empirically studied.
Yeah.
I'm definitely not a scientific materialist, but I
Yeah.
also know that if there is a phenomenon, it can
Mm,
be studied. So if it exists, it should follow some principles and laws.
mm,
It can be observed.
right.
And what you said about the new age woo stuff,
Yeah.
metaphorically is correct.
Yeah. Yeah.
The light is the energy, one form of energy in the
Mm,
universe.
right.
But we can also say that when I speak, I'm touching you, because when I speak, I produce vibrations
Mm,
in the air, and these vibrations are electronically transferred to a device which produces them for you, so your
mm,
earphones. And then the vibrations which I started from the other end of the world are now literally touching and changing the vibration of your eardrum.
mm,
So in a sense, I'm physically touching you from the other end of the world. So these things metaphorically make sense, but ontologically,
mm.
scientifically,
Yeah. Empirically.
I'm not quick to dismiss any outrageous claim.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not like that, but
Mm.
I am also not supporting things which uh, I don't know, really. If I knew anything more, I would have been happy to share that with you.
Okay. Well, on the same note, then another question that comes to mind, and we'll get to the full moon in a minute, but
Mm.
um,
Oh yeah, don't forget about
yeah,
that.
I won't. It's in my notes here now. But the other question that comes to mind, we sort of met through some Facebook groups, and some of them are Jungian focused. Mine is a bit, uh, and he talked a lot about so a lot of psychologists are focused on the chemical and biological aspects of the brain and what make it do its thing. And what I think was the issue with Carl Jung is things that were already being explored at the time, like the biological aspects of the brain. He would, as long as there wasn't really anything to refute, he would say kind of like that's being done with other people kind of thing. Like he did a lot of that in his writings where he would recognize uh, Freud and Adler, where they would get to a certain point, and then where he would say, okay, this is good, but this needs to be added onto. And so he was less focused on the biology and the chemistry, but a bit more on the physics. And when the world was just starting to get into quantum physics, and that's what he was trying to ground his sort of spiritual psychological theories, including the self, which is his universal God term, the what do you call individuation principle, which is the universal enlightenment term, and
Mm.
synchronicity, which is sort of like how he was trying to put it into sort of a quantum physics model. Um, anyway, I was just wondering if you had uh read any of that or heard any of that, or if that makes any sense from your perspective, how that the consciousness manifests in the brain on a physics level. Although I know your background is more on the biological and chemical level.
I can share a very good resource on that, and
Okay,
you'll be able to understand it if you know mathematics.
sure.
If you don't understand, I don't understand it, but
Okay,
so how then I know that it's a very good resource? I don't know. It's just I'm outsourcing the expertise to a friend of mine.
okay,
I have a friend Danko Georgiev. I can link his works.
okay.
He's a genius. I met two geniuses in my life.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is a chemist who sadly one of them is a chemist who can create miracles and nobody knows about that. He keeps them in secret.
Wow.
I mean he can create literal miracles,
Mm-hmm.
stuff, whatever. The second guy is this Danko dude. He's a colleague
Mm-hmm.
involved in the quantum physics of consciousness, but
Mm.
in the good quantum physics of consciousness, not in the woo
In the woo
quantum.
woo. Yeah.
He's like a stereotypical genius,
Mm-hmm.
difficult to understand. I'm not sure how famous he is, but he he learned. He's a medical doctor. He learned all of quantum physics and calculus
Hmm.
and mathematics from his own in his free time as a medical student. And
Wow.
started publishing amazing papers early on. And he recently published, maybe 2 years ago or something like that, a monograph titled Quantum Physics and Consciousness, A Gentle Introduction.
Mm.
So if there is someone whom I would consult regarding this question from a pure, rigorous scientific perspective, that will be here.
Okay.
Mm. So
All
check it
right.
out. I can't tell you anything more about it.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Well.
You're knowledgeable about
Yeah.
it.
Send me the link and I'll put it on when it goes up on online and everything.
Mm.
I know there has been more research in the past decades, especially as we got more into the unifying theories of string theory and M theory, but that's more of I don't know if you'd call it experimental theory or new theories that haven't been fully quantified yet, but they're on that path. So
My quantum physics friends, I have some friends which work in the quantum physics cosmology field,
mhm.
uh, which actually are good candidates for your show because they're
Oh
also
yeah.
interested in Jung and archetypes and psychology, and they're very knowledgeable and erudite type of people. I think they're would be nice guests and very interesting. They aren't nerds. They can speak nice. Uh,
Yeah,
some of
definitely want to talk to him if possible.
yeah, that maybe you should discuss these topics with them to
Yeah,
get
yeah.
more professional insights.
Yeah, I mean it's it's just I guess theory at this point, but it it, it starts to, because what happens with this kind of theory, especially that's been emerging in the last few decades, is it's just at least giving theories that make way for all the mysteries of the universe that used to have no outlet or possibility to make sense, and now are starting to make sense. um Anyway, it sounded like what were you saying about the full moon and it affecting our sleep or our consciousness or something?
That's controversial, the full moon, whether the full moon can affect the quality of sleep.
Does it make people go crazy or turn into werewolves?
That's also I have a whole book collecting hundreds of rare psychiatric disorders
Mm,
and why the myth of the werewolf, the vampire originated from. That's amazing. So actually vampires exist, not like in the mythological, but they're people who need to drink blood because they suffer from a disorder and they seek to drink blood from that. Also, there is a syndrome. So I haven't looked into it, but I really want to distill this book into a series. It's full with totally mind blowing stuff, which are real
okay.
psychiatric, rare psychiatric disorders. But anyway, so it isn't the data is controversial. Some studies show that there is a connection. Some larger studies show that there is no connection between the full moon and whether your sleep is affected or you go crazy. There are some studies show that there are more hospital admissions and suicides when the when there's a full moon.
Yeah.
Some disprove that. I I haven't checked what the latest research shows, so maybe there is more data about it. But it makes sense because you said something a few minutes ago that during the night you can become prey.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
We see poorly in the dark,
Mm-hmm.
and predators see
Mm.
better than us.
Right, right, right.
When there is a full moon, now we don't care because there is light pollution.
Right.
So you don't notice a difference, but go outside of civilization, somewhere in the mountains where there is no electric light. I do this every summer.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot see your hand in front of your face.
Yeah,
So
unless there's a full moon.
when there is a full moon, you can see. So that will make the life of predators easier. And I
Mm.
think that it makes sense for your sleep to be less sound so that you can wake up easily if you hear something approaching. So
Right.
that there is a natural decrease in the quality, in the depth of sleep. And I thought about it because some days ago I found a paper which showed that there is a synchronization of human sleep cycle, something like that, with the moon cycle. I haven't read it beyond a few sentences which really got mentioned, but we can link it to the
Yeah.
show notes.
Yeah. Do you think it also has anything to do with not just light in general, but the moon coming through as blue light, like you mentioned earlier?
Light in general, maybe
Okay.
not blue light, but light in general, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
That's also, but it doesn't make sense because nowadays
Mm-hmm.
we have so much light pollution that the moon doesn't change anything.
Well, do you
Think bigger
think
like this,
well,
how
and
much?
this idea almost gets into other waves that go through our body, which is the idea of gravitational waves. Um, because it seems by some research or some phenomena that our bodies on a deep unconscious level, who knows what glands or what part of the body or nervous system may or may not be involved, but that they may be aware on some level or connected with the gravitational elements, just like controls the tides of the sea and so on. um does that make sense, as far as that we might be somewhat in tune with the gravitational levels that are going on with the moon and anything else?
I don't think so.
Mhm.
Gravitational waves are huge. You have to be really fat in order to notice them. So fatter than the Earth itself, maybe.
Yeah.
Uh, but however, something which is poorly studied is human magnetoception, whether how our bodies and minds can sense the magnetic field.
Right.
We know that cells have receptors for magnetic fields. Our cells, we know that our
Yeah.
cells can sense the magnetic field and change their physiology, but we did not know whether we use that skill consciously. We know that pigeons, for example, can
Right.
see the Earth's magnetic field. They can see it like lines in the sky. And this
Right.
is why pigeons are so good at finding a specific target far away. And this is why they are used as a messenger.
Right.
Uh, I know of experiments where you can disrupt the magnetoception of pigeons when you yeah, when you like take a magnet and put the magnet at their head. Also, it seems that images taken from space satellites show that all cattle around the Earth is grazing, orienting the axis of their body parallel to the axis of the magnetic field lines. So if this is the Earth, like the cattle is like that.
Yeah. Interesting.
Also, it's interesting that dogs poop always, I think, with the head pointing towards north, like a magnet.
Really?
Yeah, that's very interesting.
I'm
Also,
gonna have
if
to get out a compass next time I walk my dog.
you don't have a compass, just get a dog and
Yeah. The
it's
dog
like
will be the dog poop will be the compass, or the way he poops.
so. It seems that we do, in fact, sense magnetic fields. It makes sense because Earth has a magnetic field. But how
On a
important that is?
on like a primordial instinct level, almost like we don't understand it. Just like you couldn't, like if pigeons or cows or dogs had language, you couldn't say, "Could you please explain to me how that you decided to do this in that direction?" They'd be like, "Huh?" So animals have they may have that connection, but it's like on a deep instinctual level. So you could surmise that humans do, but we just don't have the science to say how and why and those things.
It is on study. Yes. Do you know
Yeah.
that dung beetle, this scarab, the dung beetle,
Yeah.
which is rolling a ball of poop? Sometimes they lose the ball of poop,
Okay.
uh, and they need to find their way back. And they look at the night sky and they see the Milky Way, and they use the
Interesting.
Milky Way, and the Milky Way is changing with the rotation of the sky. They use the Milky Way as a way to orient where they are and where they should, in which direction they should go. That's a beetle.
So evolutionary speaking, if you think that dung beetles are our ancestors, that's how far back astrology goes. Astrology has been in our consciousness at least back through the dung beetles that you use the astrological signs almost to
Well, I
that
wouldn't.
it's a little bit of a stretch.
Yeah, the beetle astrology is a new field. I wouldn't
Beetle
call it.
astrology. Okay.
I wouldn't call it astrology. I would call it navigation, like a
Okay.
seafarer or like
Okay.
a ship navigator, using the stars to uh, know where they should go.
Okay. Navigation. I guess I guess that makes more sense. It's almost like we use navigation now through satellites and everything. That sure goes back millions of years. Who knows? It goes back a very, very long time. Um, well, anyway, I was just thinking of that because it's like certain I don't know the biological theories of like hormonal cycles, especially of women, but they seem to have. I've heard. I don't know the scientific literature on it, but often there it seems that what do you call it? Menstrual cycles can sync up with the lunar cycle, but I don't know if that might be completely out of your your range of study. But I'm just thinking about these things as far as how that we connect on a deeper level to what's going on, especially in regards to the full moon and when we barely ever go out and go outside anymore, especially at night.
Yep.
But yeah, strange. things to just theorize. Okay, so another thing we wanted to get into is the evolution of self-deception. So that's something you talked a bit about in your TED talk, but um, the reason that seems interesting to me is one thing that I study a bit or talk about a lot here on the Daily Archetype is the idea of universal values. And
Mm,
one thing I've been talking about a little bit lately is how that even if we have got all the value structure figured out, or we've unearthed our primordial value structure or whatever, um, and we know exactly like we should weight this value this much and this much and this is shadow and this is everything else, and if even if we could perfectly know that, however that we figured that out, even if it was through artificial intelligence or whatever else, then that has to be balanced against the self-interest of everyone involved. So you could say like people should you know not be so materialistic. People should be more loving and less hating and not murder or whatever. But when it gets into the field of everyone's self-interest, that's what kind of throws off that whole value structure, because some people in their self-interest, it may make, and this is kind of like the whole study of good and evil and values and everything else, is that of self-interest and how people see the world from their unique uh ego perspective, I guess. um but yeah, what can you tell us about the evolution of self-deception, because it seems like that's the ultimate trick, is that we deceive ourselves.
Before I get into that, I want you to do an experiment.
Okay.
Uh, go into any prison,
Okay.
go to visit someone, a mass murderer, and tell him you should be more loving and kind.
Mm-hmm.
See what would happen. That's a nice experiment that we should do.
Yeah.
Mm. This, if you do this,
Right.
you will disprove 90% of modern social science.
Mm.
Now let's go into the values thing. Self-deception is not something that we do occasionally. Self-deception is the default state of nature. Now let that sink in. Let's do an experiment with the audience. Let's close our eyes. Let's take a deep breath. And now just realize that almost everything you know about yourself is complete bullshit. It's a complete lie. Let that sink in. I'm not throwing this lightly. I'm not joking around. I'm trying not to troll tonight, so I'm going out of my way. This is a very serious insight that we evolve the capacity for self-deception, and it seems that that's the natural state. What is unnatural is everything we did culturally, religiously, spiritually, psychologically to avoid self-deception or to minimize the damage. Now let's be more concrete. Uh, the tribe in which we evolved usually consisted of 50 to 100 people, 150 to 150 max, which is the Dunbar's number. So we evolved in a very small social space. And almost, so for hundreds of thousands of years of human evolution, we played a zero-sum game because we never had any excess of resources. We started to accumulate an excess of resources when we started having agriculture. Before that, it was a zero-sum game. We didn't. So we
Yeah,
couldn't.
and agriculture's still pretty new, only 10,000 years at best.
Something like that, 10
Yeah.
to 12,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Uh, now, if you have a zero-sum game, it means that if I receive more resources, and resources can be not only food, resources can also be time, resources can also be free time for you to rest so that your muscles can regenerate more.
Or knowledge even.
anything which gives you a survival edge.
Right.
You know, access to anything which is beneficial for your and your offspring survival. We never had any access of that. So when you're in a zero sum game, if I receive more resources, that means that I took them from someone else. I took them at the expense of someone else. Now, if the individuals which receive more resources, we can conclude that they would have higher chances of survival and passing down their genes. So it means that the people who are alive now are the descendants of those people who had access to the most resources available. This is an oversimplified model, but at its core, it is true. There are other variables as well, random events, for example. But this core line of thinking, let's call it correct to see where we are going to get with it. So those who have more resources survive the most, pass down their genes the most.
Right.
Therefore, the people who are alive today carry the of those people. Now, how to get more resources? If you manage to deceive others, that, for example, you just killed a large mammoth and you're cutting the mammoth up to share the different pieces to the hunters. If you're able to deceive others that you were more involved in the hunt than what you actually did, then you would receive a larger share from the mammoth. However, if you lie, you will show signs, physiological signs that you're lying. You know, you'll move in a specific way, you will blink in a specific way, you will start sweating, because when you consciously lie, you start calculating in your brain the different consequences of your lie and what should you say in case they say that, what should you respond if they catch you, and this processing leads to the physiological signs that you're lying. And
Right.
people evolve to be really good lie detectors.
Right.
Because we wanted to prevent this kind of cheating.
Mm-hmm.
We are extremely good lie detectors. I think it may be wrong. I just have something at the back of my mind that we can correctly guess whether someone has recently lied just by looking at a photo of their face. Not saying whether this is true, check it up. It's just something, a random thought, which I think I've seen somewhere.
Did they put a statistic on that, like the percentage?
I think it was some study, but as I said, it may be a complete bullshit. I may be deceiving myself that I remember that. But if nobody did such a study, I would be interested how to do such a study because that's something, a very good idea.
Yeah, it's a good study.
Whatever now.
Yeah.
So if you consciously lie that you were more involved into the hunt with the spear, they will catch you and they will punish you. And if you think about it historically and also mythologically, deception, lying, and is one of the greatest sins for which people are being punished.
Yeah.
You may be friends with someone for 20 years and you catch them one day that they lied to you about something minor.
Right.
That's it. You're no longer friends. Does it make sense? Yes, it does, because lying, we evolved to lie in order to get someone else to steal someone else's resources.
Well, because then what, on a psychological level too, they become something else. Because if you trust a person, then you trust what's going to is expected will unfold in that relationship. Like you will at least always be mutually good friends seeking a common aim, even if it's just to not be assholes or whatever. But once somebody deceives you, it opens up like a whole new universe of possibility. Because if you don't trust the person, then
Their
you just
behavior isn't predictable anymore.
yeah, you have no idea what they're going to be. whether that and to what end it's going to be. And if they're just seeking out their end and they're willing to be deceptive for it, then they are, and this is why that, yeah, relationships are ruined, whether that's business, family, or especially in intimate relationships. And although one interesting aspect to it is, okay, I was reading one of these Jungian books recently that I did on the podcast, Map of the Soul, and Murray Stein made the point that seemed interesting, how that in Western culture, it's a guilt culture. And in the guilt culture, basically what that's saying is a person is guilty, perhaps, of lying, for example, in this example, but because they have this guilt, it can be redeemed. In other words, you can say this person is a liar, but if they, in our Western culture, for the most part, we can say, okay, a liar, if they do A, B, C, X, Y, Z, they can be redeemed, and we can say, okay, they made a mistake because of this thing and needing to grow up, mature, whatever, and now they're trying to rectify their ways. Whereas in the Eastern culture, for the most part, although now East and West are kind of like homogenizing into just a global culture here in 2021, but in the Eastern culture, it's more of a shame culture, and in the shame cultures in the East, it's more that it's kind of the end of the world once you lose face and lose persona and those kind of things. Anyway, so that gets into what you're saying about trust and lie detection, and it sounds like you're going somewhere with it, though, that we have then learned to self-deceive because we sort of need to in survival.
Yeah, I will explain it briefly. But
Yeah,
when you said Western culture, you should say Western slash or equals Christian culture, and will be 100% correct.
sure.
Everybody benefits in a culture where you can get a second chance, because everybody will screw at least
Right,
once.
especially when you have a some kind of a,
Screw up.
well, some kind of a designed system or a method to it, to say everybody screws up and fails sometimes, especially earlier in life when we're developing as adults or whatever. And so this is kind of the method for redemption, or the method for to right your wrongs, which is a little bit of an advance in Western culture, and you might be able to call it Christian culture, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, imagine what kind of civilization you're going to have if everybody gets severely punished when they screw up, and everybody will screw up.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the thing in the East, especially Japan, is uh, in the shame culture, and that's probably where it's been the most. Although it's a little bit different here in the more modern or postmodern world, but it would be common even to disembowel yourself or commit suicide if you shame yourself, lose face, and or shame your family in certain Eastern cultures. Where, yeah, that would be really bad from an evolutionary standpoint. Maybe you could say uh, that gave the East an Eastern culture, or you might call it Buddhist versus Christian culture, or whatever the case, but where that they had less, in some areas, less of a path to redemption in the culture compared to what advanced in the Christian world, where we have these paths to redemption. But yeah, it does have an evolutionary advantage, which is somewhat new uh, in the time frame. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, so only I'm far from an expert.
Yeah,
I'm also far from a complete imbecile on these topics.
sure,
Meaning that I'm less than an imbecile on these topics. But
sure.
if any behavior has evolved and stabilized over a long lifespan, at
Mhm.
least up until now, it was adaptive. So
Sure.
that change, that disembowelment, the harakiri, stuff like that, it may have been adaptive. So let's not throw away something which has been developing for thousands of years.
Yeah, there's some value to it, but what it makes me think of specifically on this is how, if you look at the population over time, yeah, of course, antibiotics and medical science and soap had a lot to do with the population boom that started 300-ish years ago, where for all of our history, population was somewhere between 500 million and maybe up to 1 billion at the most ever in history. And then it started a huge spike 200 or 300 years ago. So I'm wondering, as we just hypothesize and theorize a bit here, if the more shame type of culture made population stay at a certain level, or that was part of it, whereas the redemption culture, because evolutionarily hypothesizing or whatever, in the past, if you're stupid or a liar and all these other negative things, for the most part, you're just going to die in an evolutionary perspective for 1 million years or so. But up in the modern and postmodern era, there's all kinds of things that we do for dumb, degenerate people and whatever else to keep them alive, even if they're kind of like dragging on society in certain ways. So all that you can kind of see in the population boom, but it's sort of hypothesizing as we're thinking about still kind of on the line of deception and self-deception and even redemption.
Let's get into the self-deception. So we
Yeah.
saw how
That's your thing.
if you see if others you can get more resources, but if you get catched, you lose everything. So
Right.
take your time. Others cannot catch you lying if you don't know that you're lying.
Right.
That's the most important message here.
Which is something Carl Jung found out right away, by the way, when he basically was in, I don't think he directly invented it, but he was involved in what became the lie detector test, which tested the connectivity, and he used a word association test to help find complexes. And that's one thing that he found really early, about 100 years ago, or less, or more, is that we self-deceive a lot, and a lot of it has to do with unconscious protecting certain behaviors that we want, that we know are socially unacceptable, like we might say shadow in Jungian terms. So like the shadow will protect itself by self-deception, to kind of put it in Jungian terms. But go ahead with self-deception science.
Yes, let's repeat that again because it's important. Others won't catch you that you're lying when you don't know that you're lying.
Right.
Second thing, we have a great capacity to form false memories. In fact, most of your memories are false. I can tell you what studies were done. If I Photoshop you on a background of some city where you've never been at, a huge percentage of people will start telling you stories from their trip to that city, and they were never there. But so it takes one Photoshop photograph, and you construct a whole new experience, and you believe that. So the capacity for false memories is huge. I can tell you a personal example, which will immediately perfectly lead to the idea of self-deception and how useful it is. So I got into an argument with someone in front of an audience. So we were a lot of people.
Okay.
And I told her one sentence which I wanted to tell her for quite some time. So I rehearsed that sentence in my mind. Why is this important? Because this is how I know that what really happened. That I know that I personally am not suffering from a false memory, because I really wanted to tell her that sentence. And I won't tell you what the sentence is for privacy reasons. However, 1 minute later, when all the arguing blew up, she told everybody, he told me that I'm stupid and an idiot.
So did she actually believe that, or
she was really hurt, which I kind of like that. That was the point.
Okay.
Are bad, but that's not my style. It's just not fancy enough. I wouldn't say to anyone that you're stupid and an idiot. That's very cheap. You should insult people like a sir. You should insult them with a style. And I told her something which has a lot of style in that, and I rehearsed that in my mind for quite some time. So that was a spiteful thing to do. I shouldn't do it that often. It isn't wholesome. It isn't good for you. And so, but she really believed that she had the false memory. Now, why did her brain reveal something which wasn't that insulting? Actually, it wasn't aimed as an insult. It was aimed as a, let's say, edgy feedback.
Yeah.
It
And a
was
Jungian perspective, by the way, we think of this in large part as like the ego identity being protected by the dichotomy of being between the what we call the persona and the shadow. So the persona, and a lot of this is unconscious. It's that we have our ego identity that we think we're a wonderful person, and we protect that by putting out a certain persona, and a lot of that is unconscious. It's actually a mix on that level of conscious and unconscious. And then like if we project out a persona that we are um, a wonderful person and that we would never cheat or lie, for example, then a lot of times lying and cheating will go into the shadow as a repression, and it will come out unconsciously, or it will get projected out on others, where like if we see a little lie that somebody did, when we like hold that as ideal, never ever lie, then we'll like, if we see somebody in like a possible potential lie, because we really want to lie, because we're really these creatures of like a balanced psyche, then we project it on others like, oh my god, that's the worst person in the world because they lied about taking a cookie from the cookie jar or whatever. So it's, yeah, it's that dichotomy that gets into this map of the soul that we've been talking about lately. um but yeah, so yeah, it's self-deception. It's and it
uh,
goes on a deep scientific level, apparently.
so why did she deceive
Yeah, yeah,
herself? In
yeah,
order, because when she accuses me in front of others, now that's the key takeaway here. When she
mm,
accuses me in front of others, she can demand greater reparation. If we were a tribe and if I did something wrong to someone,
mm,
if if the victim can imagine in their minds that what I did to them was far greater than what actually happened, and if they
mm,
are able to convince the judges that I really did that, they can demand a greater reparation. So more
right,
resources will be extracted from me to them. So it actually would be very beneficial to be not only a victim, but a huge victim. So
right.
if you blow up your victims in stages. So that's a way to extract free resources. And but you need to really believe that the person will need to really suffer. Actually, both the victim and the person who did the wrongdoing uh, would be victims to the self-deception.
Well, okay, and this gets into, and I know we can wrap it up in a little bit. We're going a little long,
Mm.
but this gets into the idea that, okay, evolutionarily, we might say something uh, tens of thousands of years ago, it was all about um, physical resources like mammoth meat and whatever else that we get.
Mammoth
uh,
steak.
yeah, mammoth steaks. But as that we have evolved, especially in bigger groups, like we've been in for only um, 10 to however many thousands of years, or in the neighborhood of tens of thousands of years, but bigger and bigger groups only for a few thousand years. Um, the biggest resource is actually social resources. And we take it for granted now just because that's sort of just given to us. Like, you're a citizen of the Western civilization, so therefore we get like so many resources allotted to us, especially being in the modern world where it's like everybody gets internet with like unlimited knowledge almost, and everybody gets you know like, yeah, we're not to like universal basic income necessarily, but it's like easy.
You have water. You have clean water. That's enough. So that's the
Yeah,
number one pillar.
water, sewage, and all these things that we take for granted on a physical level, but also even on a social level, where it was, for thousands of years, it was a big deal to develop the social relationships and everything else. Like if you read the biographies of those, pre 100 years ago, it was like a big deal to know people that could get you books, because people didn't really have access to books and get mentors. Whereas now people can learn to be a physicist and whatever else just through the internet. So our main resources are actually social resources, but now we just take it for granted, just like we take for granted having clean water and sewage. So that's what, on a however conscious or unconscious, that what's going on is we need and that's what like a lot of our anxiety is attached to, is amassing social resources and relationships. But what's strange now is we take it for granted because society is so abundantly giving and forgiving to us that it's just like we get all these resources of physical resources as well as mental resources and everything else. And so evolutionarily, we used to have to like work really hard and have endless anxiety to amass the survival things that we would need and the survival advantages socially and everything else. And now we don't really have to do that, but we still have the anxiety, I think, that's built into it. And that kind of like gets into what you talked about and you studied, and even in your TED talk, is how there's like this, and that gets into like the other subject that we mentioned of how that we are kind of hardwired to not be happy, because if we became happy, then we would digress in our survival ability, sort of.
That's an oversimplification, but it's
Sure.
true.
Yeah.
It's true. Regarding the social resources,
Mm-hmm.
if your tribe is 100 people, and from
Right.
which we can choose from, let's say, 5 or 10 mates at most,
Right.
you would guard your mates and you would really make sure that they survive. So your
Right.
brain would pull you to really love them and care for them.
Right.
Compare this to the modern age where you open your Instagram, and if you're any female, even if you aren't attractive, so
Yeah.
any female, actually unattractive girls, ugly
Yeah.
girls, receive more messages because they're seen as an easier target. They are perceived as an easier target.
Okay.
So any girl will receive tens, if not hundreds, of messages a day.
Yep.
And at least 10, 5 to 10% of those guys would be taller, better looking, richer than you, if you're her boyfriend. And maybe they will send her dick pics with some enormous cock.
Yeah. Enormous
So
dick pics.
compare,
Okay.
so human resources are now also abundant,
Right.
and humans themselves in relationships got commodified.
Mm-hmm.
And if you lose someone, you don't lose anything because you have another 100 candidates tomorrow. And actually, this is an under recognized problem because, as you see, when the relationship between a man, the relationship, which is the foundation of the family, if that is unstable, everything falls apart.
Right. It's a lot of the issue in our modern world. And yeah, I think the issues that we run into is, on some level we think that way, whether however conscious or unconscious it is, that like, oh, whatever, screw that guy, I lost a friend, no big deal, I'll get new friends. Or oh, whatever, I lost a girlfriend, I've got 100 girls lined up.
But actually, it isn't that easy. So
Right.
we have this on one hand. On the other hand, the under-recognized pandemic is the pandemic of loneliness.
Yeah, because we're losing depth of relationship. We have width but no depth now. It's like it's like we have a overabundance of shallow relationships in the modern or postmodern era.
Correct. So we have the illusion that people are so easy to replace.
Yeah, but
That's
not on
an
the deep
illusion.
level.
The reality shows that people are becoming, you are exposed to more potential partners, but we are becoming more lonely, lonelier.
Right.
And that's actual research. I will write down to link to the show notes how
Yeah.
loneliness changes our immune system function and it
Mhm.
contributes to disease.
Yeah, that's deep stuff. I think the uh maybe the last issue that we can get in before we wrap it up is just the simple idea of why happiness is so elusive from an evolutionary perspective.
I will. I will. I will link to key papers, which are short reads, but will give you great insight on the topic for anybody who is interested. Because I will only butcher the topic by summarizing it here. But imagine that you're a prehistoric human, and you set a goal, so how the motivation system works. You set a goal and you want to achieve it.
Right.
If you are getting closer to the goal, so you experience positive effect. You feel the closest thing we can say that is happiness. So happiness is really not the destination, but the path. It is very cheesy, a very cheap quote, but this is based on our current knowledge on how the dopaminergic system works.
The dopaminergic urge.
So you feel the good emotions as you progress towards the goal. However, when you reach the goal, the dopamine spikes a little bit and falls down. And you feel like, have you seen that GIF, that image of a raccoon? And they gave the raccoon no idea how to say this in English. It's like that sugar, which is like a cotton, sugar.
Cotton candy, we call it.
Cotton candy, yeah. And the raccoon always washes its food, so it plays the cotton candy in the puddle and it disappears. And the raccoon was like, "What happened?"
Okay.
Where is the happiness? This is how we feel when we achieve our goals. How many times we told ourselves, "Once I pass that exam, I will be happy. Once I get that apartment, I will be happy. Once I become a doctor, I will be happy. Once I become a scientist, I will be happy."
Yeah, get this girlfriend or this apartment, this car, whatever.
You feel bad. It makes sense because if you achieve the permanent state of satisfaction, you won't be able to you won't be motivated to have another goal to keep you going forward. And this makes sense in the evolutionary context, because a goal in the evolutionary context was, for example, get there and get some water, but you could never get enough water that would be enough for you to be satisfied for 1 year. So the water will you drink the water in an hour, and then you need to be motivated to have another goal.
Yeah, because you couldn't even really store water for like a million years.
And also the things in terms of survival. Survival means that there are a lot of bad things going on which we need to avoid. So this is why our brains evolved to be so proficient in creating negative emotions. Fear, anxiety, stress, which will help us avoid the harm.
So we're actually normal if we're anxious and scared and all that.
Anxiety is normal. Anxiety disorder isn't normal. Anxiety is normal. Anxiety disorder isn't normal. And by what do we mean by normal? Well, we also live in an unnatural environment. We'll press these buttons in our brains to the maximum. To the disorder.
Yeah, it seems like so like the trick that we might fall into, just in light of what we've said the last few minutes, is we feel like we need to, like, if we get a relationship, we get a friend, we get a girlfriend, a business deal, whatever, a car, and we think, oh, I got a girlfriend, I need to get another girlfriend. I got a friend, I need to get another friend. I got a car, I need to get another car. But the more, I guess, evolved, but you got to trick yourself to see the evolution in it, is rather than that so much of getting the shallow width but no depth, we need to start to find the depth where, like, I've got a friend, I need to get like a deeper relationship with a friend, or have like it more like quality over quantity, maybe is the right way to look at it. And then I know you got to go because it's later there in Bulgaria.
No, I don't have to go. I have enough time.
Okay, I just didn't know if it was late because you're at a totally different time zone in Eastern Europe.
It isn't late. I mean,
okay.
I go to bed pretty late. So
okay.
You can say early. It depends upon.
Yeah, after midnight. Okay.
I have enough time. If you enough time, we can continue.
Yeah, we can continue for a few minutes anyway to at least wrap up these ideas.
I can tell you that you cannot trick yourself in order to change your behavior. I mean, everybody knows that sugar processed sugar, like a cake,
Yeah.
isn't
Candy
good for
bars.
you, and
Yeah.
you feel bad after eating that, and you still do it. So even if you don't have the knowledge, it's very difficult to control yourself. This is why, just a hypothesis, I think religions evolved to
Yeah.
make marriage holy. And
Mm,
when people really believe that, that when people really believe in the higher power, uh,
hmm
unlike of today,
Yeah.
when you really believe that a higher power, which you believe that it is true, has made that relationship holy,
hmm
I think that's a protective mechanism against people separating once we started living in large societies.
Well, and even if it's not true on a metaphysical, guy in the sky with a beard looking down, whatever, it is true on a metaphysical, psychological level, in that if you have let's say you have an intimate partnership and you make a commitment and you sign a commitment and you decide you're going to keep a vow, that actually becomes a holy sanctified thing, but it's on a personal psychological level. And because of that, it has I don't know if you could call it like a snowballing effect, because the more that you become focused on that relationship, almost like we are talking about a minute ago, where helps you find that depth of relationship because you focus on it, then a new sort of universe of potentiality will opens up to you, because you're less distracted by your tens to hundreds of other potential mates, that you can focus on the one mate. And then because you're doing that, you can focus on the depth of your work and the depth of other relationships. So that's the way it
It
makes
won't,
sense to me. But
it won't work. You know that it won't work. Once God is dead, everything is permitted.
what was that
Yeah,
last part?
once God is dead, everything is permitted, everything is allowed. If you don't believe in a higher power which will impose
Mm.
moral judgment, you know that you shouldn't do it, but it's kind of, well,
Yeah.
maybe just this time, maybe I have just one piece of candy, maybe I
Right,
will
right, right.
just
God's
grab
not
some.
really watching, or Santa Claus
Yeah,
isn't really watching.
that's the last time I know that it is wrong, but well, this is just the last time that I will do it. And when you smell some hot juicy, I shouldn't say what, and if there won't be any consequences,
Yeah, yeah.
you'll still do it. Some people won't, and these people have an advantage, but most people will just be, well,
Well,
just this.
so a couple things on that gets really interesting into some of the things that I fascinate me and we talk about here. So one, uh okay, so sure, in our society God is dead, although some people to whatever degree have their varying levels of faith. uh and sure, maybe like once you say, okay, for sure there's no God in the sky or whatever, but at some point, I don't know if you'd say higher consciousness or higher evolved or higher understanding is to understand God is always watching in a way, even if it's maybe not the exact metaphysical God, because the God who's always watching is yourself. So, in other words, if you are like, I'm just going to get away with this piece of cake, or this being promiscuous behavior and lying behavior, it that's how that on the inside, you're always seeing. It's like Santa Claus is always watching, but it's really yourself, or the self, kind of in Jungian terms. And that, if you pay attention to it, is what you see that transforms yourself into something uh like a good higher level of consciousness or a bad higher level of consciousness, is that level of what's always watching, which is like the self. So, and that's almost like gets into the Jordan Peterson concept of, if you act as if God exists, it's better, because in a way, God does exist, at least on the yourself is always watching level. So,
Metaphoric, yes, but you know that there are no consequences. So when you are tempted, you will do it. This is my point. I have a lot of experience with screwing myself over,
Yeah, yeah.
despite my best knowledge that I shouldn't have done something.
Mm-hmm.
So, the only thing which would work is something hilarious which I saw: digital chip implants in the reproductive organs. So you have like a chip in your penis, and
Okay.
your partner has one in her vagina, and if you stick it somewhere else, it will inform the partner that you
Okay.
have done something wrong. That would work better than any higher consciousness and ghost is watching from your
Well,
consciousness.
but we are always watching ourselves, and
Mm.
this kind of gets into your whole like lie detector thing, and of course this will happen in intimate relationships where it's like, why were you really looking at that person for 2 seconds longer than normal? And all these things of trying to, if there's like a boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, they'll start to notice things, and sometimes it is legitimate and sometimes it's a projection. Like the guy, for example, might really want to cheat on his wife, and so he'll start to project that on his wife. And so she might be a totally faithful woman and everything else in every aspect, but because he projects that on her, he starts to see, uh oh, she looked at that person like longer than normal, or oh, why did she have that text message where it might have just been nothing. So what's strange is ourselves as God and devil is kind of always watching, um and it kind of gets into the act as if God exists is a better way to act.
You said something which
Mm,
gave me an interesting idea. The
sure.
problem with you watching yourself is that it's if you have the capacity for self-deception,
Right,
you
because it
will
happens on
deceive
conscious and unconscious levels, but go ahead.
you will deceive yourself that what you do is justified in order to get your way. Your brain will deceive
Right,
yourself that
your own
you're doing the
self-interest.
right thing. And this happens to drug addicts.
Right, right,
So
right.
they even if they have the will to withstand the urge, but their brain will at some point rationalize that they really have to take it because of some
Right,
outrageous.
right, right.
Mm. So try not to use your phone for a week. So most people can't do that for 1 hour. Try to
Yeah.
not use your phone for a week. Your brain will make up all kinds of excuses that you really need
Right,
to
right, right.
think about some project, something,
Yeah, it's an
whatever.
emergency. Well, okay. So this gets into a really interesting idea that's hard to put into words, but I think it's really important and right on to what we're this sort of subject here. So it's the idea that gets into, like Jordan Peterson talks about, act as if God exists is a better way to act, essentially, or that's what
Mm.
he does in his uh issue of if he believes there's a God or not. Because, and a lot of that is simply because some people say I believe in God but they don't act like it, but he says I'm not going to answer that, but I'm going to act like it, which is a tricky thing. But in that exploring the idea, you could hypothesize, or I wonder what you would think, is that it may be better if you act as if God exists from a lot of different perspectives, whether you want to call that psychologically, evolutionarily, phenomenologically, or whatever. But to the next level, is it probably better if you actually do believe God exists on some level? But of course, don't do the negative things that happen with believing in God, because of the right values. Like there's some people that believe in God and they become jihadists and murder. So of course, don't let it go that way. But on a scientific, uh, what do you call it? Psychological level, is are there advantages to belief in God?
Nietzsche has written about that. That's
Mm,
one of the main things he says. In fact, I can tell you cannot act as if you believe in that, because you can say that you act as if you believe in God, but you won't do it. You can't do it. You are incapable of doing it for the reasons which we discussed 2 minutes ago.
mm-hmm.
The only way to really do it is if you really believe it. Imagine if
Right.
you pull down your pants to jack off to midget porn, but
Okay.
you really look up and you see a father figure in the sky judging
Yeah.
you. You know, it
Yeah.
for us
And
sounds
10 and
hilarious.
10 angels looking down at you like, what are you doing with your dick?
Do you know the meme of that guy with the dynamite and they're saying him, you're saying that throwing dynamite is a martial art, and it's like, as long as it works, you know.
Yeah.
So it sounds outrageous, but as
Mm,
long as it works, and it seems to have worked for a lot of so millennia to push us from fallen state of dark ages to create the scientific way of thinking that at the end killed religion itself. So this is why we killed God, because
right.
God religion created the type of mind which is empirical, logical, to search for the truth, and that same mind, by its search for the empirical truth, created science, which then killed God. So it's like a suicide. So religion committed suicide. Uh,
Well,
this is not my word. This is what
yeah, yeah. Well, then what I'm wondering, and on that perspective, is if it, and this is a lot of the, I don't know if I'd call it debate or friendly argument or whatever that I get online with people a lot of times, is that
you should throw them until they start crying. This is the only way to do it. So
okay,
continue.
okay, but the basically the fact that because for somewhere in the neighborhood of known history, at least, we have been religious people, that now in the modern world, or postmodern, you might say, where we could say we killed God or whatever, at least on a societal level, uh, that happens in our mental conscious minds, that we don't believe in God, quote unquote. But it, well, one term is just like, there are no atheists in foxholes. In other words, it's like, if you're in a near death situation, you're going to cry out to God. But then the other is just that people, even in their behavior of making science their god, some might say, or making a football team their god, or certain idols, they behave as if they're god. So it's, I guess what I'm getting at is do we still behave religiously even if we deny, or a lot of people deny, the existence of an actual metaphysical god like that?
Studies show that
Okay.
experts say
Okay.
that
Okay.
evidence says that
Yeah.
if you are a scientist, you know how fucked up all research is. I mean, I've worked on a project for 6 years now, and it's a complete mess despite all my best efforts, and my standards are higher than the average in the field. And it's still, all you can publish in Nature, you can publish everywhere. When you actually see how the research has been done, it's quite a mess. It's just some guy did something. On the outside, it's very shiny. It appears like some great scientific research with standards, whatever. But then you see that the sample size was small. Then they used a lot of statistical tricks. Then some of the buffers which they used were a little bit old, or some of the antibody was not quite functioning properly. There were some false
Yeah.
positives. Yeah, saying that studies show, and when you actually know how studies are conducted, or like with the Einstein's case, when you actually read into the studies, you see a lot of holes in the
Right.
way of thinking. So you can't say that, well, Einstein had a big brain, he was a genius, some genetic mutant who was very smart. No, you cannot say that when you actually read the studies. So whether we believe in a religious way, uh, I wouldn't go there. I wouldn't comment on that. Most of I can't say anything which
Mm.
would be beyond some guy
So
saying
yeah, just be hypothesizing. Well, I
way beyond my area of
yeah,
expertise.
yeah. Well, I guess from an evolutionary perspective, you can say there has been an advantage to behaving in a religious pattern for essentially known history. And now, and this might just be like a hypothesis to make or whatever. So now, in a lot of ways, we still behave in the religious pattern, but we just call it other things.
Yeah, I try to argue with vegans online. Maybe
Yeah,
that's
exactly. That's, I guess, what I'm getting at. But and they argue in a religious way, like, and actually, I was just watching last season South Park, I think, where sometimes you learn educational things, like all the whole arguments through South Park of, you know, veganism and how it's not about the meat or cruelty, it's about saving the planet because of all the carbon emissions from, you know, meat farms and everything.
yeah.
um
Let's forget about fossil fuels. Yeah, the
yeah,
burning stuff.
hamburgers are what's causing global warming.
When red meat is 5% of the calories in the Western diet, but
Mhm.
that's the reason for everything. Yeah, and
Yeah, so basically, it does get into a religious pattern because it's not just like, let's eat a salad instead of a hamburger. And for here's a nice idea. It's that if you eat a hamburger or a steak rather than vegan stuff, you're destroying the universe or destroying humanity. Is how it comes across with certain vegans.
I'm hearing meteorites
Oh
approaching.
yeah. uh, right. So I guess that's just
Can you
saying.
imagine? Can you imagine someone grilling in their backyard and then the stars start falling because
Mm,
that's actually how these people feel. I felt the same when I was vegetarian for 4 years something. I felt the same. So I know personally, so it feels like that.
yeah. And that's how that they are, and it's so I guess what it is that we can't exactly escape our religious patterns, although some people try, but when they do, like the way that I guess even Jordan Peterson puts it is that if you adopt nihilism, where
Mm.
you just are completely unreligious in your behavior, what you do is you adopt a behavior pattern of uh, the religion of pure suffering,
Yeah.
because that's all that you're getting out of it.
There is no true nihilist because if you were a true nihilist, you would have killed yourself. So at least there is no true living nihilist.
Mm.
If you think about that. A cure for nihilism is get rich. Unless you're already rich, then I don't know what to tell you. But I think that a lot of nihilism is just you don't have enough money and every life is overwhelming. You
Well, no, I mean, there's a lot of rich people that can be, or not even not necessarily rich people, but at least people with money that can be nihilistic, even
Mm.
in, you know, the arts and literature, uh, are very can be very nihilistic, or at least explore those nihilistic ideas. And it's gone into you can see it a lot in culture, nihilistic ideas, nihilistic people. Um, and so a lot of it is, sure, it can be, if somebody's a loser, they can say that life is meaningless and feel nihilistic. But a lot of it too comes from that death of God, of not being able to see that metaphysical meaning, because it's hard to give things meaning without a uh, metaphysical understanding of the world, or to see things connected or see meaning in what you do beyond the present day.
Imagine the pattern. You're destroying your brain with porn, alcohol, smoking pot, not going outside in the sun, not exercising, eating processed sugar, sitting on your ass, being lonely, arguing with people over anything online. So you're doing this every day constantly. You're destroying your brain. You feel awful. And then you're like, it doesn't matter, then you say the universe doesn't matter, and then you go on to say nothing matters, and then you say people should behave in that way because it doesn't matter. So you're making a very big logical leap from your own suffering, making an ontological claim about the nature of the universe, and then you're saying what other people should do because of that. Just as silly as it sounds, uh, take care of yourself first. Try to not do the things which
Right.
cause your brain to feel that bad.
Yeah.
And whether you hold these dark beliefs afterwards. If you still do, you're just mentally ill. Sorry.
Right, because that's the other thing with the nihilism thing is that when it goes to its extreme, like the shooters, like what was his name, Eric Harris, famously put out journals that start out nihilistic, but then they become religious. Like he is going to, he's the Columbine shooter, but that he's going to give meaning, in a sense, to the world by taking innocent life because of him not or him hating the nature of being, essentially, is what it is, and him needing to get vengeance on the nature of being in his world. So that is to just put the hypothesis that whether we like it or not, we behave in religious ways, and so it's best to put those ends towards something that will help us be healthier and not destroy ourselves or the world.
Uh, no idea how to do that. That's the
Mm,
most important thing to do, but I really have no idea how to do that. I just
mm,
thought about something, just a
yeah,
food
yeah.
for thought.
Mm,
Have you seen any, at least Western depiction of a wise person, of a sage,
okay.
who appears happy? All of them appear pretty miserable.
Yeah.
That's something to think about. That knowledge and wisdom may not bring happiness and joy. And there is something called depressive realism. Have you heard of that?
Mm-mm.
That depression is associated with a more objective view on certain parts of the world.
Mm,
And the interesting thing is whether that works, whether depression can lead you to see reality more clearly, and that can help you become wise, or does it work in the other direction, whether seeing things more clearly induces depression? Because it seems that self-deception is also useful for you to maintain some healthy state of mind. Think about that. In evolutionary terms, you wake up, everything is trying to kill you: microbes, predators, other tribes, your fellow tribesmen. You're starving, you smell bad, there is disease. You're starving and you have to eat, but in order to obtain food, you may die. You
mm,
have to believe yourself that the
right.
odds are greatly in your favor, that things aren't as bad. If you
Right.
really saw reality and how bad things really are, you would just kill yourself. And in that sense, uh, seeing the
Yeah, we
truth,
need a mythology.
uh,
We need a myth, a story.
objective, seeing the objective state of how things are is a disadvantage, which is cool to
Right.
solve.
Well, on the last podcast I put out, we were talking about, I was talking with Eric, or no, what's his name? Jared Chan, who has a YouTube channel. And we were talking about individuation, but what comes to mind as what we're talking about right now is that Carl Jung put out the idea of stages of, I don't know if he said the word consciousness, but something like that, but like stages of consciousness. So like the levels, uh, 1, 2, 3. Well, 1 and 2 are basically like a young person or a Neanderthal, or, very primitive thinking. Um, by stage 3, it's the religious person. So the religious person using the God ideas to uh, have that evolutionary advantage that we talked about. Stage 4 is the modern person, and the modern person is kind of like above these religious ideas, and not everybody does that. Probably more so now in our day than even 100 years ago when Carl Jung was writing. But so stage 4 would be people who are the modern, and they kind of see the world in all of its reality for what it is. And Carl Jung said, even though that's a higher stage of consciousness than stage 3, as he put it, which is like the religious state of mind, a more
Mhm.
like genuine state of religious, it's a dangerous state of mind because it can lead to nihilism and everything else, like we were talking about, and like Jordan Peterson warns a lot about, and Nietzsche. But he goes on to say there are higher levels than that, which maybe is more ideal. So that would probably be the person who sees the world for all it is, and in the path to something like enlightenment sees how would you put it, can see the potentiality for maybe God or a godlike consciousness or whatever that might be, as a person attains their relationship with the divine or the universe or whatever you want to call it, without getting into like woo terms, but a connection to the universe or being or the totality of being or whatever, to where they then get their divine relationship from a more of an internal source rather than ideologies. And so
Mm.
that's like a what he calls a stage 5, and there's beyond that, but which not everybody does. It's very rare, but it's something. And the book we're reading, what's his name? Murray Stein calls it postmodern because it's just beyond the modern. Um, does that any of that make sense as far as what you studied the brain and psychology and neuroscience, as far as there are higher levels of consciousness beyond the modern, and that it would give a person advantage in at least in their own life and consciousness and fulfillment?
What you said
Mm.
is in line with what I commented just before that. You should post this in the show notes. Do you have a source for that? Huh?
Yeah, yeah,
A source for that?
yeah,
So
yeah.
post
Well, send me the
if you
links. I'll
have.
put it in the show notes and everything later.
I mean, you post in the show notes where Jung exactly has described these stages of consciousness. I would be interested in reading
Yeah,
more
well,
about.
that I got from the book that I've been talking about a lot on the podcast, Marie Stein's Map of the Soul, and that was chapter 8, which talks about individuation, which is Jung's sort of universal enlightenment sort of term. And in that chapter, he goes into those ideas of the stages of consciousness, and that's what we chatted about in our last podcast. You can get that book, and I'll give the
All right,
sources. But go ahead.
well, that's it. I have to read more about it, and right now I can't tell you anything more, which is
Yeah,
upsetting.
yeah. Okay. Um, I don't know, because I guess what all I'm thinking is it kind of solves a little bit the issue that we were wrestling with even now, that uh there's been this death of God. Humanity has killed God in the past few hundred years or so, and we have something to a responsibility as humans, uh, which is to resurrect God, but we don't know what that means.
Mm.
And this is getting into some maybe uh, deep things beyond your normal scope of study, but I guess I'm just trying to see, and maybe it's just because there was such an evolutionary advantage for known history, and now there may be an advantage to the resurrection of another way of looking at things beyond the modern way. That can be very dangerous and nihilistic.
Yeah, just replace God with the law, and then place some corrupted people to execute the law,
Hmm.
and you get the modern world. That's it.
Yeah, that's the what do you call that? The law is putting natural laws, that's the whole thing of Western civilization, constitution, and whatever else that we have as laws in our legal system, is that puts natural law as the highest value to replace God. But most people are even unaware of that, but that's going on some level, and that's where we're at. But we're sort of in a transition probably of consciousness, but I don't know if any of these things connect with your normal field of study of neuroscience and the brain.
They do connect. I've
Yeah.
thought about these things as well, but it may take me some decades to
Yeah.
whether I can
Yeah.
create a useful even create just a useful idea around those. If there is humanity in a few decades,
Well,
maybe cockroaches will figure it out afterwards.
right. Well, okay. This is the conundrum with the brain, and I'm sure one of the main things that people like you in neuroscience deal with is the idea that so much of what we experience psychologically, you'd probably call subjective, like just so much of my experience and your experience and every individual's experience is not in the objective world that we can lay out and study probably empirically. So that seems like the main challenge with what we're trying to understand in the world, especially on the psychological level, is that most of what goes on is on a subjective experience level, and so therefore it's hard to put into these empirical terms that you want to, especially as a scientist. So go ahead.
Do you know what really steps on my toes? Okay, can you say that? Do you understand? What really angers me? Not angers, what really disturbs me, right?
Okay, like a pet peeve.
When some nerdweight with glasses like myself, for
Yeah.
example,
Some white coat.
nerdweight, yeah, with it's like actually
Yeah.
there is no love. Love is only chemicals in the
Yeah, yeah.
brain, you know. Like only oxytocin in the neural
Yeah.
cells. They are laughing as if they've uncovered some as if God gave them revelation on the nature of the universe,
Right,
and they
right.
use that. It's some nerdwit so probably is still a virgin at 35 while doing
Yeah, the
second
worst of the
PhD.
scientific materialist nerds. Yeah.
There is no. Do you know what I tell to these people? Do you know what you should do with these people? You should grab them by the balls. You
Okay.
should squeeze and twist. And when they start crying, you should tell them there is no pain. It's just some chemicals in your
Yeah.
brain. There is
Hmm.
no pain. This is as funny, as funny as it is. That's I think I got the idea from Jordan Peterson that
Hmm.
pain is more real than the molecule.
Yeah, it's like the most real reality.
Once you're in pain,
Mm.
all of that philosophizing and intellectualizing drops
Mm.
out. Uh,
Hmm.
So, from a pragmatic perspective, arguing, should we say, if you're listening to beautiful music, I like music, I play music myself.
Mm.
If I tell you it's just vibrations in your eardrum, will that make the song less beautiful? No. So both realities are correct,
Right.
obviously.
It's a duality.
Okay, let me tell you a better analogy. If we have 5 large senses,
Mm-hmm.
special senses, 5 special senses, and we have others. But if I touch someone,
Mm-hmm.
let's say that I have only touch, my experience of them would be only from the touch, but then I can also see them.
Mm-hmm.
And if you see something, and if you taste something,
Mm-hmm.
and if you touch something, that's a vastly different experience. But
Mm-hmm.
our brain can integrate these 3 completely different things into one.
Right.
Now, I can argue that the molecules and the neural firing, whatever, and the beauty of music or the pain or the love are just like the different, as if, let's use the sensory metaphor, as if these are different senses looking at something greater. I don't see where the I don't see where the big controversy is here. We don't know how they connect still.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we will one day, but I don't see dilemma whether one is more real than the other when both are real. Is taste or touch or smell more real than the other sense? It took us some time to integrate how the different senses integrate together,
Mm-hmm.
you know, but we didn't argue whether smell or touch or vibration is more real.
Well, yeah, and this gets into a deeper level, like a Kantian or a Plato, Socrates level of like the real form is beyond the senses. It's pre-sense and post-sense, and the sense data just gives us a clue as to what to live by and survive by, we might say, but it's just a drop in the bucket of what someone's reality is. Even just like you and I interacting right now, we are presenting one micro slice of each other's reality, and the real reality is infinitely bigger and unknown to us. But that doesn't mean that we're like afraid to interact with each other. It means that we, uh, even though most of reality is in the realm of the unknown, we still venture into it, uh, knowing that we figured out how to make do with our very, very limited knowledge and understanding
Mm.
of the world.
About the first thing which you said, you should check out Donald Hoffman's work.
Okay.
I doubt we will look. He exactly studies that true reality is completely different than what our, not only our senses but also our conceptual mind can
Hmm.
figure it out. He's very deep, very scientific, very interesting. But I have a better saying.
Okay.
I said it several times. It's something which I like to use, like with the pain example, with the balls. I have another one. Once a hot girl
Okay.
tells you, touch my boobs, you
Okay.
don't start arguing whether on the quantum level atoms can really touch.
Mm.
So I think that we need to maintain a pragmatic sense of when this knowledge can be useful to guide our behavior and when it should stay at the conceptual theoretical level realm.
That's deep. The deep boob theory.
Yeah, touch my book. Well,
Your
on the
boob theory.
quantum level, from string theory,
Yeah.
they are books don't actually exist, and
Mm.
two atoms will repel each other. So no.
Well, and that gets into what I was saying a few minutes ago, as how that the difficult thing with psychology, whether it's on a behavioral level or a the chemical level of neuroscience, like what you studied, um, it's very hard to do empirically because so much of what goes on is on that subjective level. So like on the objective level, you could argue endlessly about uh if a person touched a boob and what that meant and what that did inside of the two people's bodies, if certain body parts hardened or softened or not, or whatever the case might have been. uh and that'll be different for every person depending on how they may or may not have been attracted to the person, how much that they had to eat, their own self image, of course, their own self worth, self feeling. um and so it's all on the subjective level, which is what makes these things so hard to empirically study. And so I guess what I'm trying to grapple with there, that maybe I'm sure you do, is perhaps in the future we'll have to at some point have a better way to empirically understand and deal with subjective experience, whether that, because up to this point the only way we can really deal with subjective experience is to ask people questions, and that only, and of course, to the point of what we brought up originally, that's very, very, very superficial, especially with the high level of self-deception we have. uh so I don't know. Go ahead.
However, if you even if you're deceiving yourself,
Hmm.
I think in the clinical setting,
Hmm.
that person isn't suffering because they're deceiving themselves. Isn't that a good thing if our goal is to minimize suffering? Should we treat it
Sure, although you don't know, because sometimes it's self-deception, like what do you call it, some type of a schizophrenic or a insane person, or a person on some level had lost their mind, and or whether that's multiple personality, or whatever else, clinically, whether we do it chemically or with therapy or whatever else, we want to heal the person from that psychological disorder. But a lot of times those complexes and disassociated, disordered personalities will take on a life of their own and want to defend themselves to whatever degree that it may or may not be conscious to the individual that you normally think you're talking to. So sometimes the self-deception you might say it's good, and sometimes it can be prolonging the suffering. It really depends on each situation, probably.
You said something very important
Mm.
uh, about that. What happens if a person has suffered for quite some time and they
Mm.
build an identity around the suffering?
Right. That's very
What
critical.
happens if all of your life there are people born with some diseases and 99% of their life is going through doctors and hospitals?
Mm.
They have no time and energy to invest their mind in anything else. So they are like, I am the one who is suffering from that and going through the medical system constantly. If you cure them, let's say, if you cure them from their disorder, from their
You take
disease,
away their identity.
there's nothing left. So what's left? It's painful. The known. I have another thing. The known hell is preferable to the unknown paradise because the unknown is scary. You don't know what lurks there. There are snakes in paradise as well, as we have discovered some time ago. So that's something important. And I want to wrap up by
Yeah.
integrating the biological with the psychological slash
Sure.
mythological. I've seen many people who went for years, they went to therapy. They talked with some psychologists who had zero biological understanding. These people suffered greatly from something which could have been cured with a simple dietary change, some
Yeah.
minor supplements, cut out sugar, don't eat that. Many people suffer something which I've researched a lot and experimented on myself, and I consult people about that. Is dietary intolerances. You eat the
Right.
wrong food that activates your immune system in the gut, that activates the immune system in the brain, which is actually my subspecialty in the neurosciences, and that leads to mental illness, disease, depression, brain fog. And when you discover which food is the trigger, suddenly your life changes. You feel yourself again. The depression is gone. The bad mood is gone. The negativity is gone. It was avocado or kale or some random vegetable,
Right.
which you do not know that it was triggering you. So this is the useful biological perspective, and that person will spend a lot of money, years on therapy, and nothing will help because the problem is biological. On the other hand, I've seen people who got treated the biological way, but since they've suffered quite a lot and they built a lot of defense mechanisms, projections, identities, whatever around their suffering, they also needed someone, once they started feeling well, they also needed someone to untangle that personality
Right.
knot which
The
bonds.
complexes. Yeah.
Yes, so we need both. So it isn't an issue hardware versus software. You need to
Yeah.
optimize both.
That's a lot, and I know we'll probably wrap it up for real soon. But the other thing
So
that came,
we've been wrapping it up for an hour.
yeah, and the final wrap up. But the other thing that came to mind when you're talking about the person who is healed, so they lost their identity, is on a more practical level, someone like people often go through this thing, and I even went through this where first in like my earlier adult life, I had sort of a religious career, and then I found that less fulfilling, and I got involved in a financial career, and then I found that less fulfilling. So I tried to find something else, but also while I was doing that, I found this, and this was in the last few years. I found the statistic on to master anything takes in the neighborhood of about 10,000 hours, and so like and it
At
brings it
least for a motor skill, yes.
well and so it brings to mind what you said about the person who became healed, is then they have to find something to do with their life. And same thing, even if just like a person uh, loses relationships, loses a business, loses, it could be someone who they got laid off and their career has to go a totally different direction. And so, and maybe their career that they had been doing is obsolete at that point. But what's tricky then is they have to either completely start over, or what I've been trying to do is find out. Then this is why I kind of like got more involved in at least as a hobby at this point, or my own self-study for psychological things, because what that does is it's trying to redeem the past, because we've always been human, and I've always had dealing with my brain and the brain of just human beings. So to kind of like redeem, at least on a theoretical level at this point, to take that back for decades that I've been doing other things, to then be able to apply it towards going forward. So again, to wrap it up, I'm wondering what you think as far as a person trying to go in a different direction and reestablish their identity, and sometimes they need to either reestablish thousands of hours, or maybe find a way to redeem the past by transforming it into another path for a future direction.
I've heard of a patient, prodigy pianist,
Mm,
concert pianist. I don't remember whether it was he or she. I think it was she. She lost
mm,
all her fingers. She was young.
mm.
That was all she. That was all her life. So
All right.
she
Wow.
she lost all of her fingers. Now in her case, I think she got finger transplants to the point that she was able to play again.
Okay.
But take this with a grain of salt. It's a second-hand knowledge, so it may not reflect
Sure.
reality
Sure.
as it is. But let's imagine that it was a real case, just for the sake of argument.
Sure.
What would you do in such a case? I think that the majority of people won't be able to recover. The majority of people would
Mm-hmm.
be devastated. I think that you need to be really high in openness,
Mm-hmm.
in the psychological trait
Right.
openness, to have just the pre-installed software
Mm-hmm.
to help you to be able to think of starting something new.
Right.
What
Right.
what happens if you are genetically low in openness? You're
Mm-hmm.
incapable of start. You function more in more precise, predetermined paths, and
Mm-hmm.
you cannot step away. You will be devastated. So I think here the psychological is useful to
Mm-hmm.
help people to forge a new path ahead. I can
Mm-hmm.
tell you that I'm not sure whether people study this as clinical psychologists. This is a very high level knowledge which can be inspired from the mythological as well.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe things like psychedelics have
Mm.
are promising. I have no idea there. I am highly
Mm.
skeptical of all that research,
Right.
because a lot of woo hippie stuff are coming out. But I think on its core, there is a promise which, when studied properly, can be utilized to help in such cases.
Yeah, and it's risky too. A lot of it may go into that. Um, what can be done with psychedelics, but then that's risky, because it may alter your brain in ways that we don't want it altered, and then the proper way is probably something more along the lines of what's done in meditation and that type of practice, because even with breathing techniques, it can alter your state of consciousness, but in a way that won't do irreparable harm. I guess I don't know if what you think of that.
So the Western notion of meditation is
Pretty
very
shallow.
shallow, is
Yeah.
actually an understatement,
Mm.
and it is marketed. You
Yeah.
see beautiful women in
Yeah.
yoga
Yeah.
pants
Yoga
meditating
pants. Yeah.
by the shore, looking at the sunset, and while they are going
Yeah.
through a
And just do
devotion,
this position and.
Imagine if you're a man going through a divorce, getting divorce rate, and you have financial issues, and you lost all of your relatives, your house. But if you do this,
Yeah.
everything is fine.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. As long as there's a girl with hot yoga pants around, and maybe you can touch her boob. Maybe.
Well, on the quantum level, actually,
Yeah.
not exist.
Yeah. On the chemical, but not the quantum level, perhaps.
Keep in mind that all Eastern contemplative practices, not
Yeah.
religion, not the religions which emerge from them, the practices are hardcore and produce
Yeah.
hardcore results if you practice them in a hardcore, highly specific way. Imagine what would you produce as a skill if you practice a musical instrument, which is something very difficult to do, if you have no idea what you're doing. You will produce nothing. It's some sloppy sound.
Right.
Even if you practice that for 30 years. If you don't have someone to help you or some guide, maybe a written guide, how to practice to achieve specific results. Although in the West, people say that result-oriented talking about spirituality is a contradiction. You should achieve the
Yeah, it's
desire.
subjective.
Let's say
Yeah.
you shouldn't desire. All
Yeah.
of this talk is just to avoid quality control. Oh, it's mumbo jumbo. Anything, including meditation, should be approached with the with. You should keep in mind that it's a serious practice which was developed over thousands of years.
Yeah.
It was refined over thousands of years to produce very specific results, and most people in the West have never heard about what meditation is all about.
Yeah. Well,
I thought that as any serious practice which aims to change your brain and maybe not only your brain, your whole consciousness and being.
yeah.
Does this sound safe to you? It is safe if you do it. If it is safe only if you just scratch the surface and you don't go deep where the big change occurs. But anything which can transform you can break you if you don't do it properly.
Well, and it should. If you really are doing that type of work, it's going to break you, but and it won't do any good unless it does. But it has to break you, and then you have to rebuild yourself. This is really the way
You
to
know
do it.
how to do it.
It's well, I think it's built into us. And this is like higher that might get into like what we call like stage 5 or 6 level of consciousness, but it's built into us how to do it. But it's a it can be a dangerous and scary thing, of course, and not everybody has the especially nowadays, not everybody has the I guess we'll just say balls to do that. But
We spoke a lot about both.
we spoke a lot about balls today. We spoke about a lot of things. And shoot, that's a lot. We got into a lot of stuff. And yeah, Eastern meditation. Also, I don't know, I would just say Western religion is a tricky thing because there's such a different practice between, like, if it's a Catholic person that says, say 5 Hail Marys and you have attained a higher level of consciousness, compared to certain people of maybe very similar faith that will do meditative type prayers, and even like that will change their brain chemistry, and has been seen on brain scans through deep prayers. So it can be achieved in the West, although it's less structured compared to the understanding of Eastern meditation. But this is a whole other ball of worms, that, or a can of worms, that I guess are running out of time to get into. So anything else you want to add before we'll wrap it up, and we'll put all the links in the show notes and everything?
Well, no, it was an honor being your guest.
Yeah.
Thank you for being here. If anyone is interested to discuss topics like this, or is interested into learning how to optimize their brain and
Yeah.
achieve all of the benefits. They're free to contact me. I think my handle is visible
Hmm.
uh, in the lower left corner. Dr. DrironBrain. It's a cringy handle,
Yeah.
but it's easy to remember. It's because my family name Zhelezov is literally translated as of the iron.
All right.
So I'm working with the brain. The Iron Brain was as hilarious and cringe as it is.
Yeah.
It's easy to remember. You can find me on all social media. I'm slowly moving to Telegram
Mm.
because with all the censorship on social media,
Right.
uh, because so I have no. So you say some random thing and someone dislikes that and you're censored. So at least for
Right.
now, Telegram aren't censoring, although they started doing that.
Hmm.
But you can find me there. So you can friend me on Facebook, which is my main outlet.
Yeah.
Whatever.
I'll put all the links.
I've removed most of my posts because
Mm.
they were very
Controversial.
well. No, actually,
Okay.
I don't post controversial things. Do you find this controversial? So imagine
Oh
not
no, I mean just I guess it's the fear of censorship is what's coming to mind.
No, I've removed them because I want to republish them in a more structured
Mm.
way, maybe
Okay.
because they were a bit chaotic, but very valuable things were there, at least in
Hmm.
my opinion.
Hmm.
So that's it. Thank you for inviting me again.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Maybe we'll do it again in the future,
Of
but
course.
definitely a good 2.5 hours. And yeah, thanks for staying up, not just awake, but alert and everything else in the Bulgarian time. And yeah, thanks a lot. And for sure, send me um all the
Mhm.
links, so I'll put that in the notes for YouTube and the podcast. And yeah, thanks a lot. We'll see you around. Go
The
ahead.
last thing which I want to
Yeah.
say is that 2 plus 2 equals 4. Whoever has followed me in the last several months will know what I mean.
Okay. 2 plus 2 equals 5. Got it.
Uh-huh. You know you know what you're talking about.
Okay. 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 4 for real, guys. Okay. All right. That's the deeper archetypal level of the order of numbers that's embedded in the reality of everyone. And if anyone says it's otherwise, they are suffering from a delusion. I don't know if that's how you would put it, but that's how I think of it.
Mhm.
All right. All
Good.
right.
Bye.
Well, all right. Thanks a lot, and we'll see you around. All right.
See you
take
around. Bye.
take care. Stay archetypal.